As the army drew closer to the main causeway leading into Tenochtitlan, the formation began to tighten. The long march had worn on even the most disciplined among them, but the sight of the city rising from the lake restored a sense of order and purpose. The warriors adjusted their pace, aligning themselves into cleaner ranks as they approached the narrow causeway that connected the mainland to the island capital. Yautl, who had been walking just behind and to the side of his father, felt his steps begin to slow. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable against the steady rhythm of the march. But over several moments, the gap between him and Tizoc widened. His father did not turn to look, nor did he call out. Whether he noticed or simply chose not to acknowledge it, Yautl could not tell. The distance continued to grow. Eventually, Yautl allowed himself to drift fully out of alignment with his father's position at the front. He moved laterally through the ranks instead, his eyes scanning not the road ahead, but the lines behind. Specifically, the captives. They were still bound together in groups, guarded closely, their movements uneven and fatigued. The closer they came to the city, the more tension seemed to settle over them. Some glanced ahead at the towering structures in the distance with visible fear. Others kept their heads down, as though refusing to acknowledge what awaited them. Yautl's gaze moved deliberately across the lines until he found her. Guadalupe. She was walking among the others, her posture upright despite the restraints, her expression unchanged from what he remembered. There was no visible panic, no frantic searching for escape. If anything, she appeared detached. He did not approach, not yet. Instead, he continued forward at a measured pace, positioning himself closer to the rear of the formation as they neared the gates. When the army finally reached the entrance to the causeway, there was a brief halt. The narrow passage required a controlled entry, and the guards at the gates took their time ensuring everything proceeded without disruption. It was in that momentary pause that it happened. Yautl's eyes met hers. For the first time since he had cut the ropes from her wrists, there was no mistaking it. She saw him immediately, her gaze locking onto his with a clarity that cut through the surrounding movement and noise. For a brief moment, time seemed to still. Yautl expected something: fear, anger, recognition, even confusion. Instead, Guadalupe simply looked at him. And then, just as quickly, she looked away. There was no change in her expression, no acknowledgement of what had passed between them in that tent, no visible reaction to the man who had, in a single motion, altered the course of her life. Indifference. It unsettled him more than any reaction could have. The line began moving again, the gates opening to allow entry into the city. The moment passed, but it did not leave him. As they crossed into Tenochtitlan, the atmosphere shifted. The noise of the city, voices, footsteps, distant drums wrapped around them, replacing the quiet tension of the march. Citizens moved about their morning routines, some pausing to observe the returning army and its captives. Yautl remained near the rear, and as the column made its way toward the market district, he began to move again, this time with intention. He adjusted his path gradually, weaving closer to the line where Guadalupe walked. He did not rush, nor did he make his approach obvious. Instead, he kept a measured distance, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid immediate confrontation, but not far enough to go unnoticed. Guadalupe's posture shifted ever so slightly. She did not turn her head, but there was a subtle awareness in her movements now, as though she could feel his presence drawing nearer. By the time the market came into view, he had positioned himself within a few paces of her. The marketplace was already alive with activity, vendors preparing goods, traders negotiating, buyers moving from stall to stall. But one section stood apart from the rest: the auction quarters. It was there that the captives were being led. The line slowed, then stopped. The front of the column had reached its destination, and the rest were forced to wait as the process ahead began to unfold. Yautl took the final step forward, closing the distance between himself and Guadalupe. He stood beside her now, not touching, but close enough that there was no ambiguity. He spoke. "This is the auction quarters of the market," he said, his voice calm, controlled. "Over the next couple of days, this is where all of our captives will be sold." Guadalupe turned her head and looked at him directly. "Poor souls." The words were soft but clear. Yautl froze. It was not just the fact that this was the first time he heard her voice, it was what the words she had chosen to say. For a brief moment, he simply stared at her, processing. "Why do you say that?" he asked. Guadalupe's expression did not change. "The thought process of accepting that you are about to be a slave for the rest of your life is daunting enough," she said evenly. "But to have to wait until being auctioned off to the highest bidder in a public market to assume that fate must be even more difficult for them." She paused briefly. The uncertainty of it all. Yautl studied her carefully. "For them?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "For them." There was no hesitation, no confusion. "Once my hands were cut free from that post," she continued, "I knew exactly who my owner was going to be. They are not so lucky." Silence followed. The noise of the market seemed distant now, muted beneath the weight of her words. Yautl said nothing. Neither did she. Then, as though continuing a conversation that had never been interrupted, Guadalupe spoke again. "So do you need to complete a bill of sale?" she asked, "or are we set to go home?" Not outwardly. His expression remained composed, his posture unchanged, but internally he admired how bold her demeanor was, her clarity, her acceptance, her assumption of his intent. It was not submission, it was something else entirely. "We're free to go," he said. "No paperwork will be necessary." Guadalupe gave a small nod, as though the answer had simply confirmed what she already knew. Without another word, Yautl gestured for her to follow. They stepped out of the line together, leaving behind the mass of captives and the rising noise of the auction quarters. None of the guards stopped them. None questioned it. Yautl's authority and his proximity to Tizoc was more than enough. The walk through the city was quieter now, not because the city itself was silent, but because neither of them spoke. They moved through narrow streets and open courtyards, past homes and workshops. The grandeur of the central district gradually gave way to more modest structures as they moved toward the outskirts. Eventually, they reached their destination, Yautl's home. It was a modest cottage, positioned just outside the military barracks in a far corner of the city. It was not grand, but it was solid, well-built, functional, and entirely his. He stepped inside, gesturing for her to follow. "This is my home," he said. Guadalupe entered without hesitation. Yautl gave a brief tour, moving through the space with practiced familiarity. The main area opened into a living space, a large hammock stretched between two wooden beams, a sturdy table positioned near the center. The room was open, uncluttered. Adjacent to it was the kitchen. A wood-burning stove sat against the wall, with simple tools and utensils arranged neatly nearby. At the back of the home were the sleeping quarters. A single large petate lay on the floor, a woven reed mat, wide enough for rest, simple but sufficient. "That is all," Yautl said. Guadalupe took it in silently. Then she turned to him. "You should rest," she said. Yautl blinked. "For a little while," she continued, already moving toward the kitchen. "I will prepare something for us to eat." He watched her. There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty.
It was not a request. It was a decision. For a brief moment, Yautl found himself questioning something he had never needed to question before. Who, exactly, held power in this space? The thought passed quickly, but not without leaving an impression. Then, just as quickly, it resolved. A meal, prepared for him, served to him. The structure remained intact. "I'll need about an hour," Guadalupe added, her attention already shifting to the task at hand. "I'll wake you when it's ready." Yautl nodded. "Please do so," he replied. Without another word, he moved back into the living area and lowered himself into the hammock. The fabric shifted beneath his weight, settling as he leaned back. For the first time since the march began, he allowed his body to rest. But his mind did not follow so easily. As he closed his eyes, one thought lingered, quiet, persistent. Guadalupe was not like the others, and he did not yet understand what that meant.